Good evening, and thank you for joining us, AJ's Fight fans. This is Kimberly. I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas. I'm here today with Cami Evans from Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Cami.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been a long time since I've seen you in person, but this is good.
I know this is
This
as
feels
close as it's
good
been
too.
for a minute, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, Cami and I met, I guess now maybe 4 or 5 years ago at one of the AppFed conferences, where we were talking about eosinophilic esophagitis. It was actually my first conference, and Cami and her son Zane were the first people I met when I got there. I didn't know what to expect. I had never been to a conference, and Cami was super welcoming and showed me the ropes and took me around and dragged me around the hotel. So, Cami, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, am Cami. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm an Arizonan forever, so I can't even say. I visit a lot of places, including for conferences, but I'm from here originally. And as you said, I have a son who is 15, and he has eosinophilic esophagitis, or EOE. And so that's what brought me to this whole medical world that we're both in, right? That's how we found each other. So,
Okay. So tell me about when Zane was born. How soon after did you realize something was going on?
we did, he is a test tube or petri dish baby. We worked hard to get him, and pregnancy was fairly normal, other than you knew about it. We knew about it from day one. And I,
Hmm.
I did have reflux a lot, and I took a lot of Pepcid at my doctor's permission. Um, but I always swore maybe he'd never have acid, right? He just would be born without it because I took so much Pepcid, he'd be in good shape. Well, that isn't quite what happened. But so pregnancy was fairly normal. And although he was born early, he came early, about 5 or 6 weeks, and we spent a little time in the NICU, and not because he was small, but because he didn't know how to suck and, you know,
Okay.
regulate his body temperature or whatever. And then we came home, and within the first few months, he was throwing up a lot. He was sick a lot
Mhm.
and didn't do good. And I went back to work after 3 months and had a work trip right away. And I had saved some breast milk, but not enough. And so they supplemented with formula, and it ended up being, I think, like a soy based formula. And he
Okay.
did better. He did better right away. And sort of weaned as I was away on my trip, came back, and it was like, well, do you go back if he's doing better? So then we just kept him on the formula. But he still was sick often. And he was my first and only child, and you don't know much better. So just, I think it was about 15 months or so, and he was getting croup and
Okay.
ear infections off and on all the time. I mean, like every other week, if not more, we were at the doctor for croup or an ear infection. And it just, that didn't seem right after like 8 times. And I ended up, I kind of kept bringing it up, kept bringing it up. And one of the doctors finally said, well, go see an allergist if you really want to. So he and I went to an allergist and came out with an EpiPen and like a severe egg and slight soy allergy at about 20 months.
20 months. Okay. So let's
Yeah.
go back for a second,
Yeah.
because when you have babies, especially like you said, you worked really hard to get Zane and,
Yeah.
went through this entire process. I'm sure it was expensive and everything and just kind of an emotional experience to get your little guy here. And everywhere we read, everywhere you look, breast is best, breast is best, breast is best. Tell me about what that felt like. What did it feel like to realize that your son was doing better without your breast milk?
Right. I think that hadn't even been a thought before I had the baby, because it just wasn't something. But yeah, when it came down to it, it was a weird thing to get started, because it's weird, right? Or I guess some people just naturally come to it, but it was a little odd. But then yeah, it was sad. It was like,
Hmm.
I mean, it just did feel weird that it wasn't me, and what was I doing, right? Or what was I? And I'm sure now, hindsight, right? I can see all the things that I may have been eating or drinking that was passing through, that wasn't helping him. But at the time, you have no idea. And I mean, I remember just not even and I don't know if it's normal with every baby or if it's just, sick kids, but I remember like not until maybe he was 2 years old. I remember like a distinct moment when I came up and thought, oh, I just had a thought for myself and a moment for myself where I wasn't just caregiving or being a mom or whatever. And because you're just busy trying to figure out all the stuff going on, right?
So at 2 years old,
Yep.
you go, you see the allergist,
Yep.
you get an EpiPen. He did better with soy, but now you have this soy allergy that they're telling you you have,
Yeah.
and an allergy to eggs.
Yeah.
And was he actually anaphylactic to eggs and soy?
We never had, he had one or two reactions where I remember like a rash right away or stuff would come back at
Mhm.
us. But I don't even know that I knew how to distinguish what that was coming from at that point.
Okay.
So we did cut eggs totally, even though I don't think he'd had eggs at that point. I think he'd had them like once,
Mhm.
but I certainly ate them, different times and stuff. So I don't know, but we cut egg totally out and mostly soy. And we got ear tubes put in for his ears. And
Okay.
it was like a different world. I mean, he was like, it was so much better overnight. Like, just, it changed so much. Just knocking those things out for sure. And
And so then he's about two.
mhm,
So you've seen the allergist, you've had a surgery, things
yeah,
are getting better.
yeah.
When do you get to EOE?
Well, so we did, I forgot, we did, that doctor recommended we do like a swallow study, I think. And
Okay.
we went to the hospital and that did not go well. I think he wasn't prepped and we didn't know what was happening and it was chaotic and upsetting. So we just left. We didn't finish that one. And
Okay.
we've been given, I don't remember, somewhere in there, I'd been given acid reflux meds for him, but I didn't want to give them to him. I mean,
Okay.
call me crazy, but I didn't. I think that was when he was really little.
Mhm.
And so we went along pretty well. And when he was probably 7, 8, I started pushing protein. I was concerned that he was, we're tall people, and I was concerned that he was not going to have enough nutrients because he was real limited. I mean, we weren't having really dairy. We weren't really having a lot of foods. He had a handful of foods probably. He was, um, one who self-regulated and self-rejected a lot of foods. And I didn't push it because I may have some eating stuff. So I just let him kind of guide it. And so I started getting worried that he wasn't having enough protein for growth.
Mhm.
And so I started making him drink, I had him drinking Boost, the
Okay.
Boost drinks, and eating like peanut butter crackers and stuff like that to get more protein. And he started getting kind of sick every once in a while. He'd have episodes more and more often. And over probably a year and a half, 2 years, looking back again in the middle of it, you don't know what is related. But sometime in preschool, he collapsed once from like leg stuff.
Okay.
And he also in that 2 years had headaches and stomach aches probably every night. We'd go to lay down and because of his history of like throwing up over the years, I would lay down a lot with him. He had, bad environmental allergies and stuff. So he'd get gunky and he'd throw up. And so if I had any feeling something was coming, I'd lay down with him to go to sleep and make sure he got to sleep okay and kind of would have an idea. He had a queen bed from very young because I slept in his room so often. And so we'd lay down and then that's when he would say, "Oh, I had a headache."
Mhm.
I'd say, "Well, how long have you had a headache?" "Well, all day." "Oh, go, bud, you didn't tell me," or, "Oh, I have stomach ache." And so I didn't do much. I'd rub his belly, I'd rub his head, we'd take a bath sometimes. And then eventually he started having more and more episodes like this where it was just like a constant. And we, attributed it to teachers or like rough year at school, or, you just don't even know. That's what doctors suggest. And I was a timid parent. I think that I didn't know better. And so I just assumed maybe all kids were like this. And I didn't advocate for him probably enough. And would
So
minimize.
before you go on, Cami,
Yeah,
I wanna go back and kind of nail down the timeline because we're talking about
yeah,
a big span of time here.
yeah,
And so, couple of things. First of all, like when we talked to Irene and Kristen, we talked about how over the years the symptoms change for
yeah,
EOE, right? So
yeah.
kiddos who have EOE will start out in infancy and as toddlers with a lot of the vomiting and
Mhm,
not tolerating foods and that kind of thing. But as they get older into preschool and elementary school and that middle school age, those symptoms start to change, and it's more
mhm,
about that belly pain and
mhm,
um, you not necessarily as much vomiting, but not tolerating food well and self-restricting and
mhm,
not even realizing that they're kind of making all their food wet and
mhm,
dipping it in a lot of different things and that kind of stuff. And then as they go into those teen years, we see more of food getting stuck and it's difficult to swallow and they're having more of those spasms. So that's generally how things begin to kind of change. And
mhm,
not that symptoms don't overlap, but we know that there is a distinct difference in how kiddos respond as they get older.
mhm.
Um, and so you've talked a little bit about that, a little bit about how those things have changed. So he
Yeah.
went from at that 2 year kind of mark, he was throwing up a lot.
Mhm.
And then now he's complaining of the headaches and the belly pain. And he's not really being vocal about what's going on because, like you said, our kiddos don't like, doesn't this happen to all kids, right?
Right, right. And I think they don't even realize what feeling good is like because that's just how they feel.
Yep.
Although I do think we delayed the diagnosis because he was avoiding so many foods. And it wasn't until I started like encouraging more dairy, more dairy, more dairy, that that stuff started coming back. And so it was like it was probably really a good 2, 3 years that he was in increasingly active disease, where near the end he was getting a rash around his mouth, and our pediatrician was like, I don't know, and but our the GI we finally met was like, oh no, that's another sign, that's another symptom, and so it was like 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, and then we started having really bad episodes where looking back, I know at least one was anaphylaxis, and I really didn't have any idea. Even though I knew about his allergies, it wasn't egg, he didn't have egg,
Mhm.
so I didn't put it all together. But we were very lucky that it turned out okay that night because it was a rough night. It was horrible. And so all these things kind of started to going together. And then I happen to have a sister who works in development and works for a GI. And so we were out one night at an event. I'd ridden with her, and my ex-husband was texting me saying, "Oh, Zane is sick. You need to come home."
Mhm.
And then he'd say, "Well, he's okay." And so I told my sister, she's like, "Well, we were trying to figure out how long she needed to stay." And then
Mhm.
he said, "No, he's sick again. You need to come." So I told her, and she turned around to her doctor boss and said, "Hey, my nephew is having this, 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 and this."
Mhm.
And leg pain was a horrible thing for us too. He had a
Mhm.
lot of leg pain. But we just assumed, right, growth spurt or something because we're tall. And the doctor said, "Oh, I'll bet he has E.O.E. Get him in for a scope. Get him in to see me."
Just like
Just,
that, huh?
just like that. And so
And how
within,
old is he at this point? 9,
he
10?
was he was 9. So we got him scoped just before his 10th birthday, a couple of months before his 10th birthday. Um, and yep, sure enough, right away, he was diagnosed. So like September 15, when he was just almost 10.
So 10 years. 10 years.
Yeah, yeah,
10 years and you're doing boost,
yeah,
you're doing peanuts, you're doing dairy, you're doing all of these things that were potentially harmful. 10
yeah,
years
yeah.
and no clue. And how many doctors did you see?
You know, we probably didn't see as many as we could have because again, I think I think we minimize, you just feel like, ooh, you don't want to be dramatic and I think other people maybe because I talked about the vomiting to people sometimes or if I'd post about it, some people were turned off by that. And so then I stopped doing it when really it probably was me going, is this normal? I don't know if this is normal. Somebody tell me if this is normal because I don't know what to do. And so then you just kind of, get smaller, right? And you don't want to be, I already was accused of being like a helicopter mom or, I had him in a bubble, which I still maybe do a little bit, but he's my only thing. And I worked hard for that baby. And I'm going to do everything I can to protect him and accept, maybe advocate a little better. So we saw just a few doctors. We were supposed to see more, didn't. And I think that he self-preserved himself for so long by rejecting foods. I think that was his protection. So when people say picky eating, it triggers me a little bit because I think, no, that was how he was protecting himself.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So a couple of things you said that I want to go back to. One of the things that you talked about was leg pain.
Mhm.
For a very, very long time, I want to say probably not before maybe 3 or 4 years ago, did the professionals who deal with eosinophilic esophagitis finally admit that joint pain is part of this.
Yeah.
I remember being at a conference and sitting with our little clique and all of us saying the same thing, like, yeah, my kid has horrible joint pain, like he's always complaining of hips and elbows and, all of these kinds of pains in his joints. And it went unheard, even when I felt like I had good doctors, right? Like I had these doctors who were hearing me, were working with me, and we're doing this research. I would say, oh, no, that's not E.O.E. That's something different, And you said growing spurt, but AJ's a little guy. He wasn't growing anything.
Right.
So it wasn't because he was growing.
Right.
When did you finally get doctors to listen to you say, hey?
I don't know that we've even had those conversations still because but we also got very lucky. We got this diagnosis and we threw, against maybe what most protocol is, we threw everything at it. He was in such active disease that he said, let's do all of the things. So we did all of the things and removed. So we did like top 6 or top 8. So
tell us what top 8 is.
Yep. So dairy, which is like the top 8 allergens, which isn't really, learn about E.O.E. It's not really the same, but it's what they have to go by, right? So some do it this way. So we eliminated dairy, wheat, soy, eggs, nuts, like tree nuts, peanuts, fish, shellfish, plus corn. And then we went to see an allergist and we did like skin testing, which his body was in overdrive. So now looking back, I don't know that it was that he had allergies as much as his body was just, his immune system was just in overdrive. So he reacted to things. So we pulled out sunflower, coconut, green peppers, raspberry, watermelon, cantaloupe. I'm trying to think, that feels like about it. I mean, it's, it's not a short list. And then we started PPIs, or like an acid reducer. And we started pantoprazole, or that was our acid reducer, like a slurry. So we did the steroid slurry. Yes. And which he loathed. And he couldn't handle, they have you mix it with Splenda, which was horrible. That came up every time. So we ended up going to table sugar. And then I would have, you learn the tricks, right? I put it in a little cup and I'd have him like taste it on his tongue to remember what it tasted like before he drank it. And so that it was like, okay, I can do this. It's okay. And then he would like breathe and gut it up, and then he'd drink it, and then, he'd be okay. But he did have, I know I'm going fast forward, but he did have reactions to it and he did not like the slurry.
So let's talk before you go on the slurry. So one of the treatments for E.O.E. Is a combination of an acid reducer. Most of our kiddos, but on acid reducers even before being diagnosed with EOE, because there was always this reflux component, right?
Mhm.
But the other thing is using a steroid to coat the
Mhm.
inside of the esophagus to stop the inflammation and to
Mhm.
control the reactions.
Yeah.
And so budesonide or Pulmicort is one of those steroids that's used for that. It
Mhm.
is actually an asthma medication that's used in a nebulizer that most patients breathe in.
Right.
EOEers use it in a mixture.
Mhm.
Nowadays, people do anything from honey to chocolate syrup,
Yeah.
but back in our day,
Yeah.
you didn't have too many choices there,
Right.
and it was usually Splenda because the consistency of the budesonide and the Splenda mixed together made the sticky, thick stuff
Like a
that
biscuit.
that would stick to the esophagus and kind of do its thing. So that's
And
the slurry that Cammie's talking about.
the studies that were done with it were done with Splenda. So some doctors still say, well, that's what was studied, right? So they prefer
Mhm.
you to do that, which is fine, but for a variety of reasons, not everybody. And it's mixed with a crazy amount of it. Like some, it's all over the board.
6 packets.
Yeah, and some people, I saw somebody the other day saying like 10 or 20, and I thought, what? Like it, you know,
And we
it's
want these little kids, right? You
yeah,
guys started
anybody. Just
slurries at
want,
10. We
yeah,
started slurries at 1. And
yeah, yeah. And I don't even know how you get that done either. But I mean, it is good. It is good to treat and heal the esophagus faster, right? But it's a topical, so it's not going to maybe get to the root. Some people that ends up being the only thing and they have to do it. But we were lucky. So we did 3 months of all those eliminations,
Mhm.
slurry twice a day. And then he got into remission. So our
Okay.
um, first scope was right around Christmas because it was, it becomes a holiday break. School break turns into medical appointments and scopes. That's what he
Right.
thought for a long time. So we had a scope and then found out, I think just before Christmas, that he was in remission and he wanted to trial dairy first, which, you know, we all know now that's probably not your best first choice.
Tell
Um,
us what remission means, Cammie.
so remission is so in order to diagnose
Mhm.
EOE, you have to do, as I call it a scope constantly, but endoscopy. So they go down with a camera and take pictures all the way down to like into your duodenum, like at the top of your stomach. And then they also take biopsies. Zane didn't know about the biopsies for a few years. We didn't ever really, he didn't care to know all the details. But before one conference where he was going to be with teenagers and I knew they'd be talking about it, I kind of said, hey, by the way, while they're in there, they're not just taking pictures, they're also taking little snippets. And you shouldn't feel different just because afterwards, but just so you know that is occurring.
Mhm.
So and then they do pathology and figure out how many eosinophils are in there. So there are two different ways of measuring, but the most common I think is the high powered field. So they look at the high powered field, and if there are 15 or over, and they measure mostly in 3 parts of the esophagus, like upper, middle, and lower, and I can never remember distal. I don't remember which ones they are.
Proximal.
Um, yeah, proximal, distal, and what's the other one? Oh, all I know is I look at the
Go
number.
for it.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
upper, basically, eosinophils are in your body to fight infection and what are they called? Like disease. When you go to another country and you get a GI something like a infection in your stomach, it starts with a P. Anyway, it'll come to me tomorrow. But in the meantime, basically, they're in your body to fight things normally.
Infection and allergy.
Yeah,
So eosinophils
and
are infection and allergy.
and so, but they're not usually in your esophagus.
Right.
Right? So sometimes they're in your gut, they're in your GI. So sometimes they can come up into your lower. So it's sometimes low numbers in the lower part could be reflux or could be, something like that. It's not totally unheard of, but up top, 0. If you want zeros, top and middle to show remission. And
Mhm.
above 15, is active disease.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter how high above, because it's such a spotty disease that you could get different parts and have it different numbers, and you could, and it also depends on how deep they go for the biopsies. So you hear people talking about, oh, I have 500 or I have 200, and all of it means active. All of it means active,
Right.
and
So he was in remission.
he was in remission. So he had zeros, which was
Okay.
wonderful. And
then he tried dairy.
yes, well, we also cut out the slurry because he hated it.
Okay.
He
You
was
cut out the
old enough.
slurry and reintroduce dairy.
Yes, he was. Yes, don't tell anyone. That's what. And it's our secret. But yes, so basically, he could articulate how the slurry made him feel, and it doesn't affect everyone. Let's just be fair. A lot of people have no side effects, have great luck with it, and live a long time on slurry, and it helps their kids. But it affected his like impulse control, and he was moody, and he could say, it scares me that I can't control my moods, basically. So he could not wait to go off. So we went off of the slurry and tried dairy. He thought he was doing great, and he didn't react. It wasn't, again, this isn't an allergic. This isn't like an IgE allergy. Right. He didn't have daily reactions. He ate dairy for 3 months and thought he was going to be fine because he didn't have reactions. But I started hearing the throat clearing. And so I was a little hesitant, and he failed. He failed dairy. So his scope failed. And so we had to take it back out again.
Did you go back on the slurry after that, or what did you move to?
Nope. We just removed it. And then we got a clean scope. And we're lucky. We've been very lucky to be able to keep clean scopes just with food eliminations and PPIs.
Okay. So he's not on any steroids right now. He's still
correct.
taking the pantoprazole, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And that is his acid reducer.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you eliminating at this point?
So we've gone through different kind of trials. We were lucky to get wheat back. That's a big one for us. And we got soy back. But he's still off dairy, eggs, all the nuts, peanuts, fish, shellfish. We got sunflower and coconut back, and we got raspberries back, and we got a lot of things back. We're still off the 6 of those top 8, and then all legumes. We ended up losing pea protein. He already was pretty beans from the beginning. He was reactive to. Okay. So we have no legumes, pea protein, none of those. And cantaloupe is still a holder outer. So I don't know. And those are just from scratch tests. That one is from a scratch test. Okay. So, but we definitely had reactions with pea protein. So, and it's been
one of the things
5 years.
I want to talk to you about is, we can kind of get lost in this jargon of the world that you and I live in, and the acronyms and the medications that you and I understand. But for those who are watching, who don't speak the language, who don't have this as an everyday thing.
Right.
I know we talked a little bit even before coming on camera about the spectrum.
Yeah.
About how different it can be. And I know one of the things, in addition to figuring out what worked for your son, that you did, Cami, is you immersed yourself in the research. You jumped in feet first, dove in and started reading and looking and conferences and trying to figure it out. So tell us what you learned about the spectrum of E.O.E and the differences.
Well, right away, luckily, so my sister introduced me to another mom in town, and she goes to the conferences, and she said, get on these groups. So I got on a couple of like Facebook support groups. And first of all, it's all overwhelming in the beginning. My kid's life was flipped upside down. Our kitchen was flipped upside down. I never had happier coworkers because I emptied a kitchen and took it all to work, and they got so much food. But it's just all over the place, and it's overwhelming, totally overwhelming. Then you get on these pages and it's wonderful because you can fill in some of the blanks and things make sense. And it was great. I got so much information, but sometimes too much. And or the people who are on there are people who have really complicated cases, right? So people who stick around for support are those who are still having problems and not having success with treatment. So I thought he was going to be on a feeding tube. So my first 3 months, I was like, oh my God, I can't let him lose weight. So again, don't tell everybody, but he might have eaten a lot of In-N-Out fries because they were safe. They were safe for him. The oil was safe. It was a very clean potato. There wasn't much to it. He didn't feel like he was, you had to balance like taking away everything your child knows. And so I didn't want him to feel totally deprived. So that was a safe, and it has 7 to 8 grams of protein per serving. So I had to get that protein in him, right?
That's one of the first things I remember about you, Cami, that when we met, your ability to talk protein is unmatched by anyone.
Well. It is, I always say it's like the worst science project you never wanted, I mean, it is, it's just like, and I did immerse myself in it. It was everything I had to do to figure out how do you fix this for your child, right? And so I did go to a conference Zane and I went, he was diagnosed in September, we went in June. And we didn't stay there the whole time, but it was so impactful to be, and for him, he was with little kids, which was probably good for the first time, but he basically made me promise, like, we're coming again. And
it's the only time they get to be around people that are just like, they don't have to explain it.
Yes, right. And again, he and I both have gone through iterations of, so back to spectrum, believe it or not, you asked a question 20 minutes ago. So here I am, back to the spectrum mode. I realized, and meeting all of you too, I realized, no, you know what? A lot of kids, and I don't even know what the percentage is, but I would guess it's not the vast majority get a feeding tube. And even if you do get a feeding tube, there are so many people who do and can help you with that. And every one of them said they were relieved when it finally happened. It took the pressure off of eating for their family. It helped give their child nutrients and gave their child a sense of relief as well. And so there's, if it comes to that, it's okay too. But most kids don't end up there. And I think people who don't need the continued support disappear because you get on there and you feel like, ooh, God, I don't want to tell anyone my kid passed a trial, right? Because I know so many people who aren't passing trials. But somebody told me in Denver, like, it doesn't matter. Like, your child's experience is still his experience. Like, that journey is still rough, and it's hard for him, which it is. And so everyone's journey is different, and there's such a crazy amount of spectrum. And now they have categorized it into like 3 different variations of the disease. And I think that's just going to get more and more explored. And, but it still sucks. I mean, we talk every once in a while, it's a roller coaster, and you talk about embracing the suck and sitting in it for a minute, walk through it and be in it, because it does. Everyone's got something though, right? So sit in it, but don't live there. Move through it, and then start looking around for the good and all the things that still are good and you still have out there. And there are people all over the world who maybe never eat cow's milk, right? Or don't eat a certain kind of food. Like, food is so different all over the world. There's foods that we'll never eat just because we don't live where they live, but it doesn't mean I'm deprived of something, right? So it's just a matter of perspective, and you mourn a little bit, I guess, of what you thought it would be. Or I see people trying to reenact like smash cakes all the time, and I think, first of all, that's for you, that's not for your 1-year-old. With love, I say that. If you do it, good on you. But some of those things your child never knew or knows, so don't make them feel bad because they don't. That's not their reality, and that's okay.
Create new memories, create new traditions, create what works for you and your family.
right? You
Um,
know, Donna Taylor did, like, their family did game night. You know, they didn't eat meals together, but they got together as a family and they had game night. And so you just shift it to something that works for your family, right?
so somewhere along the lines, you got divorced,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And then you found yourself in a situation that you have this newly diagnosed kid. Did you get divorced before or after he was diagnosed?
After he was diagnosed, maybe about 2 years, 2 years, just less than 2 years after.
So you're still figuring it out, right? You're
Yeah.
still 2 years after diagnosis, you're still figuring it out, trying
Oh,
to
yeah.
figure out what's up, what's down. And now
Right.
you're in a situation where you're co-parenting, right? So how did that start and what was that like?
I think one of the first things I did even before that was, um, my mom tried in her own way to be helpful, and even when I send my ex-husband shopping, the ingredients, the derivatives are out of this world, right? So I had made a big spreadsheet, which at one point our GI said, "Don't overthink it, just go by the," and then when he saw my spreadsheet, he's like, "Okay, you're overthinking." But it was an incredible guide where you could just look at the ingredient and see, nope, can't have it, and then you just knew to move on, right?
Mhm.
So that has proved helpful for two households because it keeps us on the same page about what's on the list, what's not, because we've had to change it over the years. And the other thing that made me feel reassured was before he moved out, my ex-husband went through the house and like took pictures, of the different foods or the different labels, and we share labels. We do send pictures back and forth, if, or he might send something like, is this safe, or I'll say, oh, he's just started eating this. So we do compare notes a lot.
Okay.
um, and that has been really reassuring. He did, and he bought a toaster the same, because these are the things you don't think about, right? We have a 4-slot toaster, and my stuff goes on the left 2 slots, and my son's is on the right 2 slots. So it's the same at his dad's house. So you just kind of know when you get into the things so that it'll be safe. The one thing that was worrisome, or what I worried about, was when we were doing trials, and was like, how can I make it the same at both houses, right? If you're making something from scratch, it might not turn out the same. And when you have a child who's nervous about food to begin with, then the consistency can be a factor if they're regaining their trust. We did food therapy for a while too, which was incredibly helpful to help him relearn how to want to try foods, and um,
And
and
textures matter. So not just
oh,
having
absolutely,
an aversion because
yeah.
of fear,
Mhm,
but also the fact that textures matter for these kiddos, right?
mhm,
Um, how things go down, whether or
yeah,
not they're spasming, whether or not stuff is getting stuck. So
mhm,
all of these things matter to them as well. So
right,
I understand exactly what you're saying with that, you
yeah.
know.
So it was important for me to find like a store bought, plus in the beginning too, like natural foods were worse for him than chemicals. Isn't that horrible? So it's like, it's such a weird thing. But so you end up with stuff that's more predictable, but it'll be the same every time, right? And so that was what I tried to do through trials. And it got us through our soy trial. And so that was good. It worked. It worked. And then we've just tried to move into, now he's back to where he'll try foods again. And
Okay.
he's older, so he's braver, I think, too. And we have only had, I'm going to knock on wood, I don't even want to say it out loud. We've had one bad, like, choking incident, and that was maybe a couple of years ago. And so it was on a certain bread, so he won't eat that bread again. So it set us back, and he probably didn't have toast for a year or
Mhm.
something like that. And then we had to try it again and get more comfortable with it. And I bought a thinner bread. It's just,
Yeah.
you just have to kind of figure it out through. But I think that communication and sharing, I try to be, they've had accidents, he may or may not have had popcorn with butter on it at a movie. And so that's going to happen, right? Accidents happen. It's going to happen at every house. And it's not a matter of it happening. It's a matter of being open and talking about it when it does, so that we don't let it throw off our treatment. So if we have a scope coming up, then we just push the scope out, whatever. Like, you just move around it because it's going to happen.
So it sounds like the moral of the story is that you guys keep communication open
Yeah,
and share all of the information back and forth to try to make sure that he's as safe as possible.
that's right. And I've been very lucky that he has a stepmom who's very respectful and takes it all very seriously, and is supportive of that for him. And so, all in all, I feel really grateful, because I think that could be really scary. If he was younger, if he was a lot younger and couldn't speak up for himself. He does a lot of label reading on his own, and he started cooking out there. He doesn't cook here. He cooks he cooks with his dad's. Someday maybe he'll cook here, but I know your son does a lot of cooking. So
Yes, but
I
he's the
hope
opposite.
that.
So he doesn't cook at his dad's.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
they cook for him there. But here, he's had stove privileges for a really long time
Yeah, yeah,
and enjoys cooking for himself. So he
yeah,
takes the initiative on a lot of those things.
yeah. I think that the pride has gone up. I mean, I think that's helping, and I think he's getting some confidence in it.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
which is good. At some point, maybe he'll leave the house, and so hopefully he'll be able to eat something that he makes. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, give him a chance to cook at home. Don't go
I,
in the kitchen so
I
quick.
do. Oh, I do. I do. Much easier. Today I came out and I said, "Oh, did you?" He said, "Oh, I was going to make it, but oh, you're here now. And, so I didn't have time."
Yay.
Anyway, it's all good.
It
It's all
makes you
good.
feel wanted and needed, right?
Well,
Right.
and I don't get to do it forever. And I have to say too, COVID is going to end at some point here. And I think one of the blessings in disguise, if there is one, is the healthiest year and a half, right? Of he didn't go to school, so there wasn't just he ate regular lunches, and he just ate more at school. He didn't eat. He's never been able to eat at school, so it's always been food he brings from home, and that all has feelings and things that go with that, and just had more wholesome, more protein in his brain instead of just a snack. So yeah, me. And so I think that it'll be interesting to get back into it and then get back to the normal. We've had a break from the emotional struggle. I've said forever that EOE isn't just the food.
No,
I
it's just not
say
just physical at
I'd say
all.
it's half, 50% easily the mental game of it, and
Absolutely.
navigating other people. Like, food is such a huge component of our
Life.
world's,
Yeah.
yeah, daily life. And so having some time off from that, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see if it makes it easier or harder. I have no idea. But that's a huge part of it. We didn't even touch that is a whole nother part of it.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So last thoughts, Cami. Tell me, like, if there was one takeaway that you wanted, or one or two takeaways you want to give people, what would they be?
Um, yeah, I would say, it is a huge spectrum, and your child's or your own experience is going to be your own. And don't try and compare and think that, just because somebody's ended up one way, you're going to end up that way or otherwise. Um, and just take it one snack at a time, right? One drink at a time, one snack at a time, one day at a time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And it doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to define everything about you, but it is a big part of your life. But don't let it be, and don't put any feelings that you have of disappointment onto your child. Let them have their own experience and their own feelings and their own thoughts and their own frustrations with it, because they'll come on their own, but they don't need what you think it should be, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know. And yeah, find friends, find medical friends, and come to a conference with me. I'm happy to happy to see my friends at my conferences, and ask too. I'm always willing, and I think that even like the first time I posted, at least two people, adults that I knew, wrote me and said, "I have EOE." Like, who knew? And I had another friend who just, her son was just diagnosed. And I'm always happy to talk and guide and help, or not, and just be an ear. Or like you said, half the time these kids don't even talk about it, and we don't talk about it. We just know that everyone knows, and that we all have the same kind of experience we're going through. And so always happy to tell anybody too much.
Well, Cami, thank you so much for joining us. It is so good to see your face. It's been so long. Hopefully the
You
world
too.
opens soon and we
I
get to
know.
be in the same room together. But I
Yeah.
appreciate your candor. I appreciate you sharing your story. And I thank you. And tell Zane we all say hi.
I will.
All right. And
Thank
you guys
you.
enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Good night.
Thank you for all the good work you're doing too.
Thank you.
Bye.